In section 1.2, the reason, well, let's put it this way, the reason that we have section 1.2 there is to point out the fact that there's a lot that goes on in English that's not really about argumentation. Okay, the vast majority really is not about argumentation. Most of the conversations that you have, most of the things you read are not arguments. But you got to be able to recognize it when you do see one. Now, of course, the vast majority of the stuff you're going to read in here, the vast majority of that is going to contain arguments. But you got to be able to tell when you have an argument versus a non-argument. Now, in order to do that, though, first of all, you need to recognize what makes an argument an argument. Okay? And all arguments have two things in them. Every single argument is going to make what we call a factual claim, and it's going to make an inferential claim. Okay? So all arguments, and this is what makes them arguments, is one, they have factual claims, or a factual claim, and they have an inferential claim. Now, this is just basically the way what it looks like. A factual claim is that it's making a claim that something is true. It's making a statement. But then from that statement, an inference is made. That's the inferential claim. Okay? The factual claim is usually expressed in the premises. Okay? It's claiming that something is true. But then, after you've made the claim something is true, what inference are you going to make from that? What logical leap are you going to make? And that's going to be the inferential claim. Sir?
So the logical inference that you're going to make is that the conclusion is true?
Well, the inference is from this stuff to a true conclusion. So yes. Okay? But it's that inference, it's the jump that matters. Okay? So you have something expressed in the premises, some factual claim or claims expressed in the premises, and then through an inferential claim you get to the conclusion. Okay? So if I were to say something like this, it has rained more days in August than we've ever recorded in the Chicagoland area. Therefore, this is the rainiest August on record in the Chicagoland area. Notice I made a claim, a factual claim. Now, it may not be true. I haven't checked this out. Or it's probably not true. But I made a claim that it has rained more days in August than ever in recorded history. Now, from there I inferred that this must be the rainiest August in history. Well, it depends on what we mean by the rainiest. If we mean it's rained more time, that may or may not be true, right? Maybe it rained every day, but for 5 minutes. Okay? So it's possible that there's been more rain in August in the past. Maybe it's just rained harder in the past. But it's a pretty good claim. It's a pretty good inference. So I've gone from a factual claim through an inference to a conclusion. And all arguments have to have that. And if a passage doesn't have these two things, then it can't be an argument. Okay? Now that seems all pretty straightforward. But what we find is that there are lots of passages that might look like arguments, might look like they should be part of arguments, or might otherwise look like they're connected to arguments. And that's all great, well, and fine. But you have to recognize when they're not arguments. Okay? And that's what the rest of this section is about. Now, recognizing arguments, when you have them, can be done in many ways. Like I said before, with in other cases, sometimes some of you are just going to read this stuff and you're just going to go, aha, I see it, there's an argument. Aha, I see this is not an argument. And if you can do that, great. More power to you. You're lucky. Okay? Most of us are going to need some kind of help, though. Okay? One of the things that you can do is look for indicator words. Just like with premises and conclusions, there are indicator words that indicate that you have an argument or don't have an argument. Okay? If you see a bunch of premise and indicator words, premise indicators and conclusion indicators, then chances are you have an argument. No guarantee, but it's a good bet. So if you see premises or premise indicators and or conclusion indicators, then it's probably an argument. No guarantee. Okay? Now, when that happens, you oftentimes have what we call an explicit inferential claim. They're explicitly inferring something. They're telling you that they're inferring something. They're telling you that there's an inference going on here. Sometimes you have passages, though, that are just implicit. They don't necessarily, they're not obviously laying out the inference. Okay? So let's look at a couple of examples. If you look on page 14 in your text, the very first page of section 1.2, you have an example at the bottom of that page, an explicit claim. Mad cow disease is spread by feeding parts of infected animals to cows. And this practice has yet to be completely eradicated. Thus, okay, there's your indicator word, right? Mad cow disease continues to pose a threat to people who eat beef. Okay? That word, the word thus, is a conclusion indicator, and it's telling you that I'm making a claim here. And it's being used as such. So by all means, you're going to recognize that, I hope, as an argument. On the other hand, sometimes we have implicit inferential claims. And on top of the next page, you see an example of that. The genetic modification of food is risky business. Genetic engineering can introduce unintended changes into the DNA of the food-producing organism. And these changes can be toxic to the consumer. Notice here, there are no premise or conclusion indicators. So the inferential claim, they're not telling you they're making the inferential claim, they're just making it. So it's implicit. Now, the upshot is that when you see the premise and conclusion indicators, chances are you have an explicit inferential claim, and it becomes very easy to recognize that you have an argument. But when the argument is implicit, it becomes more difficult. Okay? So, first of all, look for premise or conclusion indicator words. It's going to be a huge hint. Now, if you don't find those, or even if you do, you still have some other things to watch out for. Okay? Okay. Even after you get that, you still have to make a step to number 2. You have to make sure the passage does not fall into one of the main types of non-arguments. At least main types of non-arguments that look like arguments. Now, the types of non-arguments fall into a few groups. One type of non-argument is what he just calls, what your author calls, a simple non-inferential passage. Simple might be a misnomer here, because it's not always simple. But the idea is that it just is straightforwardly a non-inferential passage. It lacks the inferential claim. Okay? And your book lists a bunch of these. I'm not going to go through every one of them in detail, but I want to step through them really quickly just so that you know that they're here and you can look them up if you get confused by it. Most of them are straightforward. But if you look at the top of page 17, of the simple non-inferential passages, you have warnings. Okay? And you also have pieces of advice. Now, before I get to the others, let me just say something about the two of these. Both of these are trying to give you a heads up. They're trying to get you to do something. In other words, they're giving you a command. But the difference between these is that a warning is usually giving you advice about something that's dangerous. And a piece of advice may or may not be referring to anything that's dangerous. Okay? That's really the big distinction here. There's not that much more to it. Okay? So, as it says in your book, a warning is a form of expression that is intended to put someone on guard against a danger or detrimental situation. So if you hear somebody, if you read a passage, you hear somebody say, watch out that you don't slip on that ice, like the example that shows just there. That's just a warning. It's telling you, hey, look out, there's something dangerous there. Okay. That was not that big a deal. Hey, watch out, there's a tiger around the corner. That's a little bit bigger deal. Hey, watch out, that lion's about to pee on you. Okay, sorry, I got a story. Some of you might actually know my son. He goes to school here. And if you ever meet him, you ought to ask him about getting pissed on by a tiger, by a lion. Okay? There aren't too many people you know that have been peed on by a lion, but he has. Okay? So we were at a zoo. And there was a fence, right? He's standing there looking at the lion. You got a fence here, and then you got another fence. So they're both wire mesh fences. Okay, so the lion can't get through, right? The lion walks up, and he's not very far away. He's maybe from me to John away. He's not very far at all. The lion walks up and looks through the fence at my son, kind of smells the air a little bit. Then he turns around like he's going to walk away, and he just lets loose and sprays my son completely, head to toe, dripping. And I mean not dripping, I mean like drenched dripping, dripping off his nose dripping. Like somebody dumped a bucket of water on him. It was great. For me. It sucked for him. But he's got a story. So, if you see signs, watch out for lion urine. Okay? It is a warning. It's not an argument. And it's something you should really heed. Okay? Lions may pee on you. Piece of advice, though. If you do get peed on by a lion, you should wipe off promptly. That's a piece of advice. And definitely take a shower before going on a date. Okay, this happened when he was about 3 years old, so he wasn't on a date. Okay, so simple non-inferential passages. A warning is an example of one. A piece of advice is an example of one. As long as they're not trying to convince you of something, they're just trying to get you to do something, not through any argument. They're just telling you to do something. Then it's going to fall into one of these two categories, and it's not going to be an argument. Okay? Another possibility would be a statement. I need a new marker. Of belief or opinion. Now, beliefs and opinions can be parts of arguments, but taken by themselves are not arguments. Okay? If I say, I believe that the Constitution does not guarantee gun rights. Okay? That's a statement of belief. If I say, the Constitution does guarantee gun rights, I'm stating a belief. Doesn't matter which way I go on this, I could be stating a belief. Now, if I start saying, and this is why I believe, now I've gotten into an argument. As soon as I start giving you reasons to agree or disagree with me, then I'm giving you an argument. But if I just make a statement of belief, even if I make a long list of statements of belief, they're just that. They're statements of belief. They're statements of opinions. And that's all they are. So, in your book, you have a couple of examples. One here is, we believe that our company must develop and produce commanding products that will perform a great service. I'm sorry, outstanding products. That will perform a great service or fulfill a need for our customers. We believe that our business must be run at an adequate profit, and that the services and products we offer must be better than those offered by competitors. If I'm just saying that, I'm just saying something that I believe, and that's it. Now, if from there I say, So for that reason, we need to cut our staffing levels and increase automation. Now I've got an argument, because I've gone from some beliefs and I've inferred something that should be done. I've inferred a conclusion. Okay? Conclusion. But as long as I'm just stating beliefs and opinions, it's just that, and not an argument. Now, another is a loosely associated set of statements. If I just have a set of statements that are about the same general topic, but I'm not inferring anything from them, then I have a loosely associated set of statements. So the example in your book, not to honor men of worth will be people, but will keep the people from contention. Not to value goods that are hard to come by will keep them from theft. Not to display what is desirable will keep them from being unsettled of mind. Those are all statements that are related to the same thing, about how you should behave as a leader. But it doesn't make any inferential claims from there or to this. Okay, the next one, a report. A report is simply that. Whenever you see, and this is usually going to come from a newspaper or something, the clipping, if you see in your examples, the citation says newspaper article from the New York Times or whatever. If you see something about a newspaper article, chances are you have just a report. If they're explaining something to you, if somebody is, if a reporter is just telling you what happened, that becomes a report and not an argument. Now, a reporter can make an argument, so you got to be careful. You got to ask yourself, what is this reporter up to? Is this reporter just reporting? Or is this reporter also trying to draw some conclusions? If the reporter is trying to draw some conclusions from that, it becomes an argument. But you got to read the passage to figure out which they're up to. Okay? Okay, those are the simple ones. Any questions? Okay. Expository passages. Now this is not so simple anymore. These become a little more complicated. An expository passage is basically any kind of passage that states some main idea and then goes on to explain that idea in greater depth. I probably shouldn't use the word explain here because we're going to have explanations a little bit, but I tend to at this point. Expository passages are passages which give you basically a thesis statement and then from there expand on it. Expound on it, on that thesis statement or that idea. Okay? Try to help you to understand it better. And if it's doing that, it's an expository passage. So, for example, I'm going to go with the second example here. There is a stylized relation of artist to mass audience in the sports, especially in baseball. Each player develops a style of his own. The swagger as he steps up to the plate, the unique wind-up a pitcher has, the clean swinging and hard driving hits, the precision, quickness, and grace of infield and outfield, the sense of surplus power behind whatever is done. Notice what the first sentence says. There is a stylized relation of artist to mass audience in the sports, especially in baseball. And then the rest of the passage goes on to expound on that idea. How is this the case? Okay? And then the author is pulling out some artistic elements that you see, a stylized artistic element that you see while watching baseball that is meant for the audience. Okay? That makes it an expository passage. Now, you got to be careful though. If the thing goes on then to argue for that thesis, it becomes an argument again. And the borderline cases can be kind of tough. And sometimes something that looks like an expository passage ends up being an argument. And sometimes something that looks like an argument ends up being an expository passage. And one of the things that will help you to recognize the difference is if when you're reading it, you think, this could be an expository passage. Could be an argument. But the thing that would be the conclusion is obvious. everybody, at least everybody that this is directed towards, would know this. If so, then it's probably an expository passage. If not, there's a good chance that it's an argument. So the question is, the thing that could be the conclusion, is that generally well known? If so, it's probably not an argument. If it is not well known, that puts it more in the argument camp. So, when these come up and you're not too certain, and it really could be read either way, you can say something like, if this is an expository passage, then the thesis, the idea that they're trying to explain is this, and you could write it out. If, however, you read it and you say, I think this is probably an argument, but if it is an argument, and if it is an argument, the conclusion is, and write out the conclusion. And that's okay. Okay? Questions about that? I know, this is not the most exciting way to go through this stuff, but gotta pop through it sometimes. It just kind of has to happen. Illustrations. An illustration is another non-argument. It's not a non-inferential passage, a simple non-inferential passage. So you've got in simple non-inferential passages, you also have expository passages. You also have illustrations. Okay, an illustration is a passage that makes a claim and then gives you a bunch of examples of how that claim works. Okay? So if I were to say something like, the wettest months of the year are usually in the spring. For example, March, April, and May are very rainy. Okay? Now, you all pretty much know the wettest months of the year are usually in the spring. So I'm probably not trying to convince you of anything. That's one thing. So notice it's something you already know, probably. And if it's an illustration, and it's something you probably already know, that helps to recognize it's an illustration. And then if I give you a bunch of examples, again, that makes it an illustration. Okay? Now, if it's something that's not generally well known, then it might be an argument by illustration. Okay? So, for example, the driest month of the year, or the driest months of the year are the winter months. For example, January has the least amount of precipitation of any month of the year. Now notice, I gave you an illustration to support something you probably didn't know. Okay? And in that case, it's not just an illustration, it's an argument based on an illustration. It's an argument from illustration, it's an argument from example. I can say it that way too. Okay? So, when you read a passage and it gives you a general claim and then it gives you examples that fit into that general claim, it's either going to be an illustration or it's going to be an argument from illustration. If it's something that you all generally know already, it's probably just an illustration trying to help you to understand that, to see some examples. If it's something you didn't already know, then it's probably an argument from illustration. And that might depend on the context again. It might depend on who they're talking to. Okay? Okay. Now, explanations. Okay. Explanations are probably the things that look most like an argument that aren't arguments. And the big difference between an explanation and an argument is simply this. If a passage is trying to convince you that something is true, this way. And why it is true. It's probably not an argument, or not an explanation. It's probably an argument. Okay? Now, if something tries to tell you how, it's an explanation. Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples here, and hopefully you can see what I mean here. If you look on page 20, the sky appears blue from the Earth's surface because light rays from the sun are scattered by particles in the atmosphere. Now, that's trying to tell you how it happens that light, or that the sky appears blue. And notice it tends to be something you already know, so we're back to that point again. It's something you guys already know. The sky appears blue. Now, if I try to explain how it happens that way, then I have an explanation. Golf balls have a dimpled surface because the dimples reduce air drag, causing the ball to travel farther. Now, you all know that golf balls have a dimpled surface. Then it tells you, basically, how it comes about. Okay? Navel oranges are called by that name because they have a growth that resembles a human navel on the end opposite the stern, or the stem. Stem. Again, you all know that that particular orange is called the navel orange. That tells you, it gives you the reasons why that's the case. I'll probably take the word why out of here. I'm realizing I'm starting to explain this, that why gets you in the way, the way I put it out here. So I'm taking that out. Okay? Now, what you have to do is look at a passage, read it carefully, and ask yourself what it's trying to do. And you can start by simply asking, well, if you have the conclusion, if X is the conclusion, is this something that's generally well known? If it's generally well known, that points you towards explanation. Now, does the rest of the passage try to explain why that's the case that way? Then it is an explanation. Okay? If it's something that's not generally well known, then it's probably an argument. Or if it tries to convince you that that's the case, even if it is well known, again, it's still an argument. Okay? Now, all that being said, again, you have to sometimes just look at a passage and say, if this is an argument, here's the conclusion. If this is, I think this is an explanation, and if it is, this is the explananda. Explanations have two parts. They have the explanans and the explananda. The explanans is basically analogous. It is basically analogous to the premises. The explanandum is basically analogous to a conclusion. Okay? Okay. One last example, or one last type of non-inferential passage, and that is a conditional statement. And I want you to pay attention to these because you're going to see these a lot this semester. Okay? Even as parts of arguments. A conditional statement. Now, we speak in conditional statements quite a bit, or hypothetical statements, if you will. And basically their structure is something like this. If blah, 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 then blah, 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 blah. If it rains today, we will surpass the August record for rainfall. If something happens, then something else. If you do well on all the quizzes, then you will probably do well on the exam. You will do well in this class if you keep up. Notice I switched the order of things, but I still have a conditional statement. Now, without giving you any reasons to believe these things, they are just statements. That's it. They're conditional statements, but they're just statements. If I say something like this, if it rains today, then it's going to be the wettest August on record. Well, it's going to rain later today. Therefore, this will be the wettest August on record. Now notice, that's an argument. It has a conditional statement in it. Arguments oftentimes have conditional statements in them. But if it's just the conditional statement, you don't have an argument. And that's the thing to watch out for. Okay? Now, a couple things to note about conditional statements, and this is the stuff that's going to come back to us throughout the semester. The part that is immediately following the if, we call that the antecedents. Okay? Because it's the thing that comes first. After the then, we have this thing called the consequent. Okay? Now, it doesn't matter where the word if appears in the statement. What immediately follows the if is almost always the antecedent. The exception is if you have this. And we'll come back to this again, but I just want to throw it out there for you so you can start thinking about it. The words only if work like the word then. So what follows only if is a consequent. But if you just have the word if, what follows it is the antecedent. Okay? Okay. Now, that pretty much covers the stuff in this section. And I don't want to, I've already probably explained more than I need to explain. So let's just spend the rest of today, the last 10 minutes here, going through a few problems, okay? Let's see how you do on these. Yeah.
If we're doing like a consequential statement, does that mean that it still could be an argument with it, or that it is a part of a non-argument?
It can be in an argument. Conditional statement can be part of an argument. So like I said, you know, if it rains later today, this will be the greatest or the wettest August on record. Well, it's going to rain later today. Therefore, this will be the wettest August on record. That's an argument. And it has a conditional statement in it. But the conditional statement itself is not an argument. Okay? So let's do a couple of examples here. Take number one. This is probably on page 25 for most of you. It's part one of the exercise in 1.2. The turkey vulture is called by that name because its red featherless head resembles the head of a wild turkey. What do you think that is? Okay, and in particular, what kind of non-argument? Explanation? Everybody agree with that? Raise your hand if you think it's an explanation. Raise your hand if you think it's not an explanation. Okay, good. You guys got it right. It is an explanation. Number two, if public education fails to improve the quality of instruction in both primary and secondary schools, then it is likely that it will lose additional students to the private sector in the years ahead. Argument or non-argument? Okay, if it's a non-argument, what category does it fall into? It is a conditional statement. Very good. Okay? Now, this could be put into an argument. If you now had another statement that said, public education will fail to improve. Therefore, it will lose students to the private sector. Okay? Number three, freedom of the press is the most important of our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. Without it, our other freedoms would be immediately threatened. Furthermore, it provides the fulcrum for the advancement of new freedoms. Argument or non-argument? Argument?
Furthermore, makes it an argument.
That doesn't necessarily make it an argument. That works like the word and.
Okay.
Okay?
So
Further, What's that?
Associate, opinion of belief, or statement of belief or opinion.
Okay, so if it's a statement of belief or opinion, okay, let me back up here. So we have two answers. We have argument, and we have statement of belief or opinion. Okay, any other ideas out there? So you're all convinced it's one or the other? Raise your hand if you think it's an argument. Raise it high. Come on, be proud. One. Let's take a buck here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe 13. Okay, so about half of you. How many of you think it's a statement of belief or opinion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many think it's something else? What do you think it is?
Loosely associated set of statements.
Okay, a loosely associated set of statements. How many people think it's that? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what is it?
It's an argument.
Why?
It says, without it, our other freedoms would be immediately threatened.
So what does that do?
It's giving a reason why freedom of the press is the most important, constitutionally guaranteed right.
Bingo. There's your answer. Okay. Notice it gives you a reason to believe the first statement. Now, that first statement might be somebody's opinion, and I'm fine with that. Okay? But it then goes on to give you reasons to agree with that person. And as soon as it does that, it makes it an argument. Okay? Questions? Now, if everybody agreed that that was the most important of our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms, then I might say, okay, we have less of an argument here and more of an explanation as to why it's the most important. And then it might become an explanation. But I don't think that that's generally agreed upon. I think that is, a lot of people believe that, but I think a lot of people don't believe that too. So I think it's worth being considered an argument. Okay. Loosely associated set of statements? Well, it is all about the same thing, but that's all about the same thing because some of the statements are supporting the others. So they're not just loosely associated, they're strongly associated. Okay? Does that all make sense? I appreciate those of you who are giving answers even though they might be wrong. Okay? Because we got to work through what makes them right and what makes them wrong. That's more important than actually getting it right in the first place. Okay? So please, keep answering, even if you're not sure. You know, consider it a game as far as I'm concerned. I think this is the answer, and this would be the best reason to think of this as the answer. And that's perfectly fine. I'd much rather work through different possibilities and figure out why they work or don't work. Okay? So anyway, that is an argument. Number 4. A mammal is a vertebrate animal that nurses its offspring. Thus, cats and dogs are mammals, as are sheep, monkeys, rabbits, and bears. Argument or non-argument? Non-argument, loosely associated set of statements, which would make it a non-argument. Jeff?
Non-argument.
Non-argument? Anyone else? Now do notice what happens. A mammal is a vertebrate animal that nurses its offspring. Thus, cats, dogs, and mammals, as are sheep, monkeys, rabbits, and bears. Thus, cats and dogs are mammals, along with these other things. Notice what it does. It tells you something, it gives you some examples. Probably an illustration. It's illustrating. It's giving you examples. Okay? So I would agree with you that it's a non-argument. But I would say it's a non-argument because it's an illustration.
Why would it not be just an explanation?
Well, an explanation would go on to explain what it means to be, yeah, more about what it means to be an animal, what it means to be a vertebrate, and so on. So if it said, a mammal is a vertebrate animal that nurses its offspring. So mammals have backbones that are solid, or that have solid bone in them. And for at least the first couple of weeks after birth, all mammals produce milk. Mother mammals produce milk, and the offspring drink that milk. So if I go on to explain what those things mean,
So it has to be in there.
it's going to be either an expository passage or an explanation. Probably, and actually the way I put it, I guess, is more of an expository passage. Yeah.
What's the difference between an illustration and a loosely associated set of statements?
A loosely associated set of statements are statements about the same thing. Okay? But an illustration actually gives you examples of things. So, if I were to say, ECC is an Elgin, ECC has has almost 10,000 students. ECC is a 2-year college, it's not a 4-year university. ECC is a great school. If I tell you all those things, I'm talking about ECC, so they're associated to the same stuff, but they're not necessarily in the form of any kind of reasoning process.
An illustration like gives you examples of this.
If I were to say something like, community colleges do not offer 4-year degrees. So for example, ECC doesn't offer a 4-year degree. DuPage, College DuPage does not offer a 4-year degree. McHenry Community College does not offer a 4-year degree. So I give you examples of schools that do what I just said. I have an illustration. But if I'm just talking generally about the school, it's a loosely associated set of statements because they're associated with the same thing, but they don't really have any flow of reasoning to them. They're not trying to infer anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other questions? How about one more example here? It is strongly recommended that you have your house inspected for termite damage at the earliest possible opportunity. Yeah? Piece of advice? That'd be fine. You could also say a warning. But as long as it doesn't tell you, if it doesn't try to convince you that you should do that, if it starts giving you reasons for you to do that, now you have an argument. Okay? But if it's just telling you you should do something, it's either a warning or a piece of advice.